Welcome back, Rob Report 970 WDAY AM93.1 FM. Last segment, we were talking a little bit about net neutrality. Capel jumped in on me, Natil. He sent me a message. He says, first take on net neutrality that gave me pause on my position. Good points. But then he called me out. He says, there's no way you pay for the Post. If I know my way around the paywall, you certainly do. He caught me. I don't act. I do subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. I don't subscribe to the Washington Post, and the reason why is because you can just use an incognito browser to get around. Just take the link that's blocked, paste it into an incognito browser, and boom, you're in.
No, you're giving away trade secrets now.
Well, I don't know how secret that
I
is.
know.
Anyway, I do think that's a good metaphor. I mean, obviously, like the media industry has no problem, sort of creating a tiered access to their content. I don't understand why internet service providers can't do it either. Anyway, here to talk with me is Yaël Ossowski from the Consumer Choice Center. Yaël, how's it going, man?
Going quite well, Rob. Thanks for having me on the show.
All right, so net neutrality is repealed. The world's going to end now, right?
Not so fast. I don't think so. I think we have a lot more that's going to come out of this, but really what we're going to see is just a return to the Internet of 2015. Put down your hard hats, no reason to worry. I think everything is going to be fine.
What's really going to – is anything really going to change?
I think what happens here is you kind of got a signal from the FCC. And for a lot of people who are kind of in the broadband business and in the Internet business – there's an assumption that there's going to be a huge change tomorrow, when really what it means is that companies are actually going to be able to compete. They're going to be able to offer their services. There's not going to be any big kind of tiering changes. I think there was a lot of scare stories that were thrown out there, particularly on websites. If you guys were hanging out on Twitter and you just use the hashtag net neutrality, Twitter went ahead and added a little waiting symbol on there. On Reddit, you definitely saw across the entire website that was just completely taken over, and there's a lot of activism there. Really, you're not going to see much change. What this means for the future, though, is that there is going to be a lot more competition. ISPs are going to be able to put together better packages for us. There's going to be a lot more investment on their side without the kind of danger that they're going to be breaking any rules by the FCC. The FCC, we should realize, is the same organization that obviously put out the fine when Janet Jackson had her famous slip on TV.
Right. Well, yeah, I think it's funny that it's neutrality is being defined as giving regulation to a federal agency with a history of censorship as lengthy as the FCC's. It doesn't seem to be anything all that neutral about that. But let me play, because I agree with you. I think that this gives the marketplace for internet service providers, this gives them more flexibility. I think this is going to lead to more competitiveness, right? I mean, if anything, forcing ISPs to treat all internet traffic as though it was exactly the same is going to make it so that we don't have a lot of choice when it comes to ISPs. And to be certain, I think that is a real problem in America. I think that is something we can look at. How can we promote more competition among internet service providers? I think that'd be a healthy thing, particularly out here in the rural parts of America where we don't necessarily have a lot of choices. I think it'd be a healthier thing. I think more choice addresses a lot of this. But let me play devil's advocate for a moment, because some of these ISP providers are huge. I mean, Verizon, Comcast, these are big companies. What stops them from vertically integrating in a way that they sort of create their own? Because this is the big risk, right? This is what everybody's afraid of, that they're going to vertically integrate. Comcast is going to cut a deal with, Hulu or something. And now Hulu's going to be the only one that you can really access on Comcast internet. What stops that from happening?
What we have here is we do have a very balanced world in media in general and internet, because you have to imagine that as big as Verizon and Comcast and CenturyLink and Spectrum and all these companies are, the bigger companies are the Facebook and Google and Twitter, and these are very large companies as well, and they're obviously promoting their interests whenever they're promoting the net neutrality regulations. But we have to imagine that this is an ongoing marketplace, left and right. You have buyouts, you have sellouts. Really, as you mentioned before, where there have been problems whenever there's been any kind of talk about whether or not rural communities have access, a lot of that really comes from the state and local regulations that make it incredibly hard to create an ISP. So really, when we have more regulation and more laws, and we increase the cost of complying with that, we really only make it so that only a few players can play in the marketplace. That's worse overall. Are we going to have a system whereby AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile and Comcast and all the rest are just going to all of a sudden merge? I mean, not at all. That's why you have a competitive marketplace. What's the point in competing for customers if you're trying to merge into this huge behemoth? And even so, with removing these regulations, it will actually allow for more competitive behavior, and hopefully we can have way more ISPs. And in the rural parts, particularly in my home state of North Carolina, we've seen that there hasn't been as much access, but that really is because of the local and the state laws that are in place that really discourage you from creating and investing in ISPs.
701-293-9000, 888-970-9329, email talk@wday.com. Is this says, well, here, hold on. We got a message from a caller. A caller couldn't stay on the line for a phone question, but wants a clarification on whether or not this is actually going to bring competition to the rural areas with only one current ISP choice, and how will that happen? And that does blend into what I was just going to ask you, Yael, because I do think we need more competition in the ISP world. And you're saying a lot of it's local regulation. How do we go about promoting more competition among ISPs so that, because I think that's the hedge, right? If you're worried about Comcast or Verizon or somebody like that, vertically integrating to the point where the internet becomes something other than what we enjoy today, the hedge against that is, well, competition. Because then if Comcast is doing it, I could jump to somebody else who isn't doing it. But I think a lot of people look around and say, well, listen, I'm living in a place I have one, maybe two, three ISPs to choose from. That's not a lot of competition. How do we promote that competition?
Well, you've seen that in the FCC kind of debate and everything going on here. We have 330 million people that are attempting to put their comments in on what's happening here. But it's actually much easier than that because, as I stated before, most of the regulations on ISPs are actually at the state level and at the ISP level. So that's the question to ask is, do you have more of an ability to talk to your representatives at the local level and at the state level, or are you able to talk to the 5 members of the FCC commission? And I think that's why, maybe tomorrow this is not going to create more competition. However, what this does is it takes this kind of regulatory authority away from the FCC, which is, again, an independent agency just chaired by 5 people appointed by the political parties, and it removes that away. And if you have your state and local regulations in place, which make it difficult to have your ISPs and to bring in these other players. A good example is Google Fiber, for instance. Again, I use the state of Florida and North Carolina. Whenever Google Fiber started coming into town, the local regulations made it illegal for them to offer a competing service without going through this entire complicated process. So Google has the money to be able to compete and to be able to file licenses and do all the kind of regulatory compliance, but a smaller ISP did not. So what we really have with this ruling, and that you have the repealing of this, is you have an ability for people in their local jurisdictions to be able to lobby, to write their local lawmakers and make sure that the kind of burdensome regulatory landscape is removed. And I understand the concern about not having enough competition. I think it's a very important one, and particularly for us at the Consumer Choice Center, it's one that we care about a lot. The thing that we just have to realize now is we have more of an opportunity to face that competition because it's returned to our local communities, and it's not just based in Washington, D.C. anymore.
Right. And I think, again, I think you've got to look at it is we are giving internet service providers price flexibility. I think if you look at the marketplace, there's a lot of ways. For instance, you look at like cab rides. Like, for instance, Uber and Lyft have pricing models and a delivery of service that work very different than the traditional cab drive. Those services are all competing now, and consumers are enjoying the benefit. How you get access to a vehicle. There's a lot of different ways to do it. You can get a loan from a bank and buy one. You can lease one. There's even some deals now where you sort of get, it's almost like a car sharing service where you buy like shares in a car and you get a certain amount of access. There's a lot of different ways to pay for that too. That sort of innovation is a good thing. Now, what I hear you saying though is if you're concerned about the lack of competition among ISPs, and I do think we should be concerned about that, you're saying we should be talking to our state lawmakers, state and local lawmakers? or state and local policymakers?
Yeah, of course. That's where all the restrictions are. There's a great piece that was done by Wired Magazine about 2 years ago, whenever this was sort of a huge deal and people were talking about this. Look, if you're concerned about local competition of ISPs, the FCC is not going to solve your problem, and not with this Title II regulation, because we have to go back to what that means. Everyone's just kind of caught up on the term net neutrality and the principle and what it means. But what the FCC just did now is they repealed the ruling that Internet and Internet service providers are so-called common carriers. That basically means that all the money that's been invested in putting down the wires and the cabling and the pipes, basically all of that cannot be denied to anyone else that's coming along after them. So it means that the companies that have laid down all their wires, who have invested millions of dollars to try to get different communities connected, basically anybody can jump on that now, and you don't have any kind of way that people can invest in ISPs and put down new lines. That's how it was before. Thankfully, with this repealing of it, now we're back to Title I. The Internet is now seen as an information service. You can have a lot more investment. You're not going to have as many regulatory hurdles, and companies know that they can get a profit. And I think at the end of the day, if companies are able to offer a service and people are able to enjoy it, they're going to willingly pay for that. And you definitely see that in many states with things like Google Fiber, with many particularly there are even some municipal services that are being put together, kind of municipal broadband, which, you might be against that or you might be for it, but regardless, it's something that should be able to exist, should be able to put a price out there, and if consumers like it and they're willing to pay for it, they should be able to.
Yael, we're out of time, but thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Rob.
That's Yaël Ossowski. He is with the Consumer Choice Center, talking about net neutrality. We'll be right back after this. 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. Email talk at WDAY.com. Don't go away.